mean in America and in India, and how it varies?
Yes, yes. It's very interesting to note that the term Hindu is more positive in America than it is in India. And part of this is because the Hindu community, Hindu American community, has done so well. They are the most affluent and educated of all the minority communities in America, except the Jewish people. They have twice the income and education of Christians and Muslims and even Buddhists in the United States. And they occupy many important positions. They've built very wonderful temples. Maybe some of you have gone to the Akshardham in Delhi. And actually, we helped with that. We have a book called Hidden Horizons on India's cultural heritage that's part of that. But they are building a temple outside of New York City that will be larger than that, and they already have half a dozen such temples in the United States. And also in the Western world, we have the popularity of yoga, now some Ayurveda, meditation. So, and even in America, Hindus are considered to belong to the left. 80% vote Democrat, and Hindu issues like vegetarianism, yoga, meditation, protecting the earth are also considered to be issues of the left. So in India, there's a tendency to blame everything in the country on the so-called Hindu without defining what that is. And there's a polarization where the left often targets things as Hindu in order to discredit them, when in fact being Hindu, as Hindu name of his book, is not only very positive, it's very progressive, it's very philosophical, it has much depth, and it has the power not only to bring harmony to India, but to this entire multicultural world where we have so many different points of view. Because the Hindu tradition is the most diverse, pluralistic, spiritual and practice-oriented base of all the religions. And it's not looking at converting people to a belief or an identity, but helping us know ourselves and understand the nature in which we live.
And this is exactly the point. I mean, I wrote a book called Being Hindu. You know, a lot of people told me, you're writing a book called Being Hindu. What if people think you're not secular, right? This was a big, what if people think you're communal because you're writing a book called Being Hindu? So here's the response I always give, right? I'm a classic liberal in everything apart from economics, but I believe in the free markets. I don't believe in socialism. But socially, I'm that classic liberal. I am pro women's rights. I'm pro abortion rights. I'm pro entry of women to every institution. I'm pro breaking the glass ceiling. I'm pro right of people to eat what they want, wear what they want, believe what they want. So in every sense, I'm a classic liberal. But my liberalism doesn't come from Karl Marx, who's a man I don't believe in. My liberalism, every virtue of liberalism that I have comes from Hinduism. And I wrote a full book to explain how every virtue of liberalism I possess, which is open-mindedness, free spirit, free speech, free markets, the idea of entrepreneurship, the idea of empowering the individual, the idea of empowering women, the idea of equality between people, all of those ideas come to me from Hinduism. And my identity as a Hindu is intrinsically linked to my identity as a classic liberal. And I believe that this idea that is propagated in India, that in order to be liberal, you somehow must be left, is an inherently flawed idea. Our 5,000 years of history and civilization does not teach us this at all. We have been liberal because of our civilization. The idea that, so I said yesterday in the panel also, I want to take the word, people keep saying left liberal. I want to take the word liberal away from the left. I want to own the word liberal. I am not left, but I'm a liberal. I'm a classic liberal. But I'm not left because my Hinduism comes from Vivekananda. It comes from Adi Shankaracharya. It comes from the ideas of the Nasadya Sukta and the Rig Veda. It does not come from Karl Marx. Right? So that's my point of writing I'll give you an example, right? Since we mentioned Nasadya Sukta. Now, when I was researching this book, there are two things that I read, right? I went to, I have a very diverse background. I went to a Pentecostal Protestant school in Calcutta for 14 years. Then I went to MCRC, where we also studied, among many other things, the interaction between Islam and Hinduism and so on and so forth. So, I have some grounding there. And of course, I'm a practicing Hindu. So I have this confluence of faith, so to speak, in my life. So one of the things I looked at when I was writing the book was the comparison between the Nasadya Sukta. Now, many of you have actually heard the Nasadya Sukta. You just don't know perhaps that was the Nasadya Sukta. How many of you remember a serial, a TV serial called Bharat Ek Khoj? Does anybody remember that? Okay, lots of people remember Bharat Ek Khoj, right? Now, Bharat Ek Khoj was a serial we all grew up watching. Now, Bharat Ek Khoj, if you remember, began with a title song when the credit would roll, which would say, or which said, सृष्टि से पहले सत नहीं था, असत भी नहीं, right? And it went on to say blah, 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 whatever, this or that, and so on and so forth. So that's the Nasadya Sukta, right? Because the Nasadya Sukta in the Rig Veda talks about, in the beginning there was neither truth nor untruth. सृष्टि से पहले सत भी नहीं था, असत भी नहीं, right? तो वो Nasadya Sukta अगर आप पढ़ेंगे, तो उसमें it goes on to say, सृष्टि से पहले ये भी नहीं था, वो भी नहीं था, and so on and so forth, right? उसको आप कंपेयर कीजिए, वो हमारा जो जिसको हम कहते हैं वो एक it's the beginning hymn of our civilization. आप क्रिश्चियनिटी का beginning hymn अगर देखें तो Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 है बाइबल में. वो क्या कहता है? It says in the beginning there was the word and the word was with God and the word was God. And then it goes on to say कि 7 दिनों में भगवान ने कैसे he created the whole universe, right? Created trees and birds and flowers and plants and mountains and rivers and seas and so on and so forth. And in the end, he also created man. And on the 7th day, God rested. And these are the two hymns. One is the Nasadya Sukta, one is Genesis, right? Chapter 1, verse 1. Now, when you compare these two, Genesis ends by saying, on the 6th day, God finished all this, made man. On the 7th day, he rested. That's why Sunday, a day of rest, right? Nasadya Sukta ends by saying, सृष्टि से पहले ये भी नहीं था, वो भी नहीं था, ये भी नहीं था, वो भी नहीं था. तो finally it asks, तो क्या था क्या, right? Before the universe, what was there, right? And it answers the question by saying, शायद उसे पता है. पर अभी गूगली देखिए, उसके बाद एक गूगली है, तो वो कहता है कि शायद उसे पता है. But then there is a last line of the Nasadya Sukta, which essentially says, but perhaps even he doesn't know कि शायद उसे भी पता नहीं है, right? So we come from a civilizational heritage which is questioning or encouraging us to question even the existence of God, right? I mean, that's why we say Tattvamasi, you are that. Dr. Frawley was joking, and I even tweeted about this and put it on Facebook. So he was joking to me कि पहले जब आते थे, people from the West would come to India looking for spirituality. And koi sadhu ya the master, the spiritual master, the guru would tell them, you are the self, Tattvamasi, right? तो वो बड़ा literally लेते थे. तो वो literally लेके I am the self, तो मैं ही भगवान हूँ. पर आप भगवान हो, but there is a process to self-realization which would not be understood. So that was a very interesting anecdote. So my point is, we come from a civilization which is so open-minded, to use a modern term, so liberal, that it encourages you to question even the existence of anything that you believe in. Right? One of the things somebody pointed out to me, कि लोग कहते हैं कि हिंदुइज्म में 33 करोड़ या भगवान है, देवता है, देवता या देवी देवता है, right? Now, whether it's 33 crores or 330 crores or whatever it is, finally there is also a concept of the Ishta Devta, the Kul Devta, right? So the way I like thinking about it is, सोचिए ये 33 करोड़ में से कोई आपको अच्छा नहीं लगा. No, you don't like any form, right? You worship whatever you want, because anyway Tattvamasi, right? The truth is anyway within you. You will discover that is only a manifestation. You will have a manifestation. अगर आपको दुर्गा में भक्ति नहीं है तो आपको काली में होगा, काली में नहीं है तो शिवा में होगा, शिवा में नहीं है तो विष्णु में होगा, विष्णु में नहीं है तो राम में होगा, राम में नहीं है तो कृष्ण में होगा. It doesn't matter. Finally, that is a path, because the truth is still one. एकम सत, सत तो वही एक ही रहेगा, right? विप्रा बहुधा वेदांति, कि paths to God or paths to that truth can be different. आपका truth शायद आपको मोबाइल फोन से ले जाए, मेरा truth पता नहीं बिस्लरी के बॉटल से ले जाए. But that is only a manifestation, because God is there too. Because God is everywhere. right? Now, with this kind of liberal, free-thinking ideas, now you will ask, what has happened then? All these years, why are we in this state? Why are we today in a place where in parliament we are discussing whether a goddess is a prostitute or not? I mean, ये आ गया, ये स्थिति है हमारी देश की आज, हाँ? क्यों है ऐसा? ऐसा कैसे हो गया? How is it that from that civilizational virtue we have come here? Right? It's because we are uniquely illiterate about our own civilization. हमें कभी पढ़ाया नहीं गया है. मैं आपको एक छोटा सा उदाहरण दूंगा. जब मंजुल भार्गव जी, बड़े साइंटिस्ट हैं, मैथमेटिशियन हैं, उनको एक साल पहले फील्ड्स मेडल मिला था, which is the Fields Medal is the Nobel Prize equivalent in mathematics, right? तो वो उनको जब मिला तो उन्होंने कहा कि मेरे जो ग्रैंडफादर थे वो थे जयपुर में संस्कृत लाइब्रेरी में काम करते थे, तो वहां पे मैंने काफी चीजें पढ़ा. ब्रह्मगुप्त, आर्यभट्ट, जो जितने बड़े बड़े मैथमेटिशियन थे हमारे सिविलाइजेशन में, उनके बारे में मैंने पढ़ा. एंड दैट हेल्प मी डू मेनी ऑफ द मॉडर्न रिसर्च दैट आई डू. आप बताइए, आपके कई लोग हैं जो जिनके बच्चे होंगे या ग्रैंड चिल्ड्रन होंगे या आप खुद होंगे. आप में से कितने लोग हैं जो आप कह सकते हैं कि आपके बच्चों को ब्रह्मगुप्ता के बारे में स्कूल में पढ़ाया जाता है? कितने लोग हैं जो कह सकते हैं कि आपके बच्चों को सुश्रुता के बारे में पढ़ाया जाता है, आर्यभट्टा के बारे में पढ़ाया जाता है? तो ये तो हमने पूरा निकाल दिया. जो हमारे अच्छा था उसको हमने सारा निकाल दिया और हम लग गए बांटने में. तो आप कहेंगे मैं इसको मैं बांटता हूं, उसको मैं बांटता हूं, ये करता हूं, वो करता हूं. जितना नेगेटिविटी है वो हम ऊपर ले आए,
अभी आ रहे हैं,
राइट? पॉजिटिविटी को हमने निकाल दिया. सो ये फंडामेंटल प्रॉब्लम है. बट आई जस्ट वांट टू आस्क David Frawley now. So the other thing that I wanted to ask you is, famously we were talking about this yesterday. You mentioned yoga and Ayurveda, two subjects that you have done extensive, a lifetime of work on, right? In India, one politician told us that yoga postures are supposed to be like nothing more than what a dog does in the morning when the dog wakes up, right? And a famous, one of the leaders of our political party told us this, right? Tell us, how is it, sir, that today the world over, people are discovering the ideas of Ayurveda and yoga and many of these things, but somehow they can only be discovered if they are cut away from the Hindu tradition?
Yes. Well, what's happened in India is the education and the academia, and to some extent also the media, has largely been taken over not only by the left, but by people who only believe in the physical reality, and groups that have only a physical view of human life. Today we live in the age of information technology where everything is information and energy. And also we're looking to the age of consciousness in which everything is awareness. Hinduism has that particular point of view. What's happened is when they try to explain Hinduism, instead of going into the true Hinduism of the Vedantic philosophy, they try to tie it down to old social customs in India, or even old books. Some people look at the Manusmriti and say, oh, this is what Hinduism teaches. And I say, but look, this is a book of 2,000 years ago. Show me a law code 2,000 years ago that's better. And if you're going to judge Hinduism by a law code of 2,000 years ago, why don't you do that with Christianity and all these other traditions as well? So Hinduism is viewed with myopic eyes, particularly in India. And people, when you take these Hindu ideas outside of the Indian context and repackage them for the Western audience in terms of Vedic, Ayurveda, mantra, meditation, you have ideas and practices that the elite in the Western world is taking up. Whether it's the TM movement or Deepak Chopra, whether it's the work we do, the Vedic ideas are regarded as the cutting edge of science. We find them honored in modern science today, coming into biology, into medicine, into meditation, psychology. All these ideas, and Vivekananda brought over most of them. I call Vivekananda the Einstein of modern spirituality. So what happens is this tradition is extremely powerful, sanatana, universal, unlimited. It has the ability to put together, it's a vidya, always of knowledge. It is not simply a faith or a belief. It doesn't say believe in God, it says discover God within you, regardless of the name that you use. And what's so wonderful about what Hindu does is he explains this Hindu tradition in his living experience, a philosophical and contemporary way, Discovering the tradition is part of the eternal soul journey we have from darkness to light, from non-being to being, from death to immortality. This tradition holds the power of Chit Shakti, universal power of consciousness. It needs to awaken in India. That will transform India. Old Marxist and socialist policies failed in Europe, everywhere else in the world in the 20th century. There are no communist student unions in any country in the world except India today. America never had them. They're all gone in Europe. Why should they be dictating what is happening in this country? The Communist Party doesn't exist in any other country. Sitaram Yechuri says yoga pasa is just what a dog does. Well, he's looking at reality in a purely physical way, and actually a lot of what they're doing today seems to be what dogs would do. And we have to remember that in the Hindu tradition, we honor many different points of view. In fact, in the Hindu tradition, there's no anti-blasphemy law. But why is that? If there's no anti-blasphemy law, you respect religions who have blasphemy laws, and Hindus who don't have one, you don't honor their deities, you don't give them the respect that they deserve. And Ma Durga is also Bharat Mata. It is the very soul and spirit of the country. So when you denigrate that, you are trying to undermine that tradition. So what we have in the world is an unfolding of these deeper spiritual traditions. India has preserved them. Foundation of Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, even Buddhism, Jainism. They're going worldwide, but their homeland needs to be preserved, and they have the power to raise modern India just as they are helping all the other countries of the world today.
So it's a fascinating conversation. You know, I often think about these things. That if you look at 100 years ago, if you look at a man called Vivekananda, what is Vivekananda telling us? Right, 100 years ago. I'm writing a new book on Vivekananda next, right? So that's one of the things that, you know, I discovered during the research of my book Being Hindu, which is what we are discussing here today. So 100 years ago, Vivekananda warned the Hindus that, look, you come from a truly cerebral idea. You know, the search for the truth, the search for intelligence, right? Let me give you an example. How many of you say the Gayatri Mantra or know somebody who says the Gayatri Mantra every morning? Lots of people, right? Lots of people in the audience know the Gayatri Mantra or say it. Do you know, and this is something really interesting, do you know Gayatri Mantra is one of the only prayers in the world which does not ask, वो ऐसा कुछ कोई चीज नहीं मांगता जो जनरली प्रेयर्स में मांगा जाता है. क्या मांगा जाता है? कि मुझे प्रोटेक्शन दीजिए, पैसा दीजिए, प्रॉस्पेरिटी दीजिए, वेलबीइंग दीजिए, कुछ मेरे ऊपर बुरा हो तो मुझे प्रोटेक्ट कीजिए वगैरह वगैरह, राइट? ये जनरल प्रेयर में होता है, सप्लिकेशन, कि आप मुझे प्रोटेक्ट कीजिए, कि भगवान मुझे प्रोटेक्ट करो, मुझे पैसा दो, मुझे आर्थिक क्षमता दो, मुझे बड़ा बनाओ वगैरह वगैरह, राइट? गायत्री मंत्र उसमें से कोई भी एक चीज नहीं मांगता. It doesn't ask for any of those things. So now your question would be, what does the Gayatri Mantra ask for? It asks for illumination. कि हमें रोशनी दीजिए, इंटेलिजेंस दीजिए, हमें ऐसा रोशनी दीजिए कि हम आंखों से सत्य देख सके, so that we are able to perceive the truth. It doesn't say come and protect us, because if you are able to protect, अगर हम सत्य देख सकते हैं तो हम खुद ही संभाल लेंगे, पर हमें सिर्फ वो क्षमता दीजिए ताकि हम सत्य देख सके, राइट? बट किसको पढ़ाया जाता है कि गायत्री मंत्र क्यों लोग कहते हैं? कौन पढ़ाता है, कौन बोलता है बच्चों को कि इसीलिए क्यों हम बच्चों को पढ़ाया जाता है कि अच्छा हम पूर्वज आपके बोलते आ रहे हैं गायत्री मंत्र, आप भी बोल दो, मंगलवार को आपको उपवास करना है तो आप भी कर लो. पर क्यों? ये जो प्रश्न है क्यों करें, विवेकानंद ने पूछा था क्यों करें, व्हाई शुड वी डू इट? एंड ही सेड, इफ 100 years ago विवेकानंद कह रहे हैं कि हम ना पुराणिक रहे, ना वेदांतिक रहे, ना तांत्रिक रहे, हम डोंट टचिस्ट बन गए हैं, कि हमारा पूरा रिलीजन ही बन गया है कि ये मत छुओ, वो मत छुओ, राइट हैंड से ये उठाओ, लेफ्ट हैंड से वो रखो, राइट? और ये गलत मत समझिएगा, रिचुअल्स का एक बहुत अहमियत है. रिचुअल से ही एंगेजमेंट होता है रिलीजन में. बट अगर आप सत्य बिना देखे सिर्फ रिचुअल्स में अटक जाए, जो विवेकानंद कह रहे हैं कि आप रिचुअल्स में फंस ना जाएं, अगर आप फंस जाएं तो वो कह रहे हैं कि और 500 साल अगर ऐसा चलता रहा तो हम पागल हो जाएंगे. देयर विल बी नथिंग लेफ्ट. राइट? सो ये जो इंटेलिजेंस जो है, हमारा पूरा सिविलाइजेशनल वर्च्यू ही है इंटेलिजेंस के ऊपर बेस्ड, और वो इंटेलिजेंस ही खत्म कर दिया हमने. और इंटेलिजेंस के बाद से ही आ गया, मेरे गुरुजी आ गए यहाँ पे. संजीव सान्याल is here. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Singapore. Sanjeev Sanyal is a wonderful writer, and I have to say this on this stage today, and I've thanked him in the book also. He's the one of the first people on Twitter. मैंने लिखा था 2 साल पहले, मैं इस्लाम के बारे में, सूफी इस्लाम के बारे में बहुत अच्छा किताब पढ़ रहा था, तो मैंने लिखा, संजीव को याद होगा कि मैंने लिखा था कि कितना अच्छा किताब है, हिंदुइज्म के बारे में ऐसे क्यों नहीं लिखते हैं हम, Why don't we write explanatory text? तो उन्होंने मुझे ट्विटर में ही कहा था, तुम लिखो, हम सब सपोर्ट करेंगे तुम्हें. तो उनके इंकरेजमेंट से फिर मैंने किताब लिखा. थैंक यू वेरी मच. आई वांट टू पब्लिकली थैंक संजीव सान्याल. So we are discussing the search for intelligence, Sanjeev, right? And let me then come to you. This is a theme that you and I have discussed often, that the core of Hinduism lies in this search for intelligence. And the conversation, the contemporary conversation of Hinduism has become uniquely illiterate. Why is that true?
See, one of the things to understand about Hinduism, which is very fundamentally different from other religions, particularly Abrahamic religions, but also perhaps even within the dharmic milieu, is that Hindus are not believers, we are seekers. This is very important to understand. So, the beginning of Hinduism starts with we do not know, and it is very important here to understand the distinction between Smriti and Shruti. And if you do not understand this distinction, then you haven't understood the point about Hinduism at all. You see, all Hindu texts are divided into Smriti and Shruti. Now, 99.9% of Hindu texts are Smritis. Smriti means memories. They're the memories of the great thoughts of great thinkers of the past. And then there's the Shruti. Shruti, which is heard from the gods, i.e. the canonical texts. Now, in Hinduism, the only canonical texts are the first 3 Vedas, i.e. they are the only texts in Hinduism that are completely canonical. Everything else is Smriti. Even the Bhagavad Gita is a Smriti. In other words, they are human-made, and as Hindus, it is entirely possible to disagree or agree with them, to write new Smritis. Anyone over here can write a new Smriti. When people get very fussed about the Manu Smriti, I see, why don't you write your own one? Because there is absolutely nobody is stopped from writing a Smriti. But the Shrutis are a much more interesting bunch of documents, which are the first 3 Vedas. And in fact, it's a very limited set of texts, and they are very, very open-ended. Let me take you through the Rig Veda, for example. The Rig Veda is an extremely open-ended text. It doesn't really tell you what to believe at all. And in fact, there's something called the Nasadiya Suktam, where, in fact, the last few lines of the Nasadiya Suktam says the following. What was there in the beginning? We do not know. Perhaps the great rishis knew. Perhaps they too knew not. The great gods, but they too came afterwards. Surely the great creator knows, and the last line is, perhaps he too knows not. So, unlike other religions, Hinduism doesn't start with axiom. It starts with, we do not know, i.e. with a question. And therefore, all of Hinduism is really about the search. We are seekers, we are not believers. And to understand how we go about this, you need to understand the Shruti-Smriti distinction, because basically, the Vedic texts or the Shrutis are essentially like the operating system. And all these Smritis are essentially like apps. So you can add apps, you can remove apps, you can believe in one app, you can get rid of that app, write a new app. That's all perfectly fine, because that is not the essence of what is Hinduism. The underlying operating system is the same. And really, this is the basis on which Hinduism carries on. It is very, very important, consequently, to keep writing new apps, which means that it is very important to keep writing new Smritis. I don't know why we don't write new Upanishads. There are supposed to be 1,008 Upanishads, but in fact, I don't think more than 100 were ever written, out of which maybe less than 50 are known and still extant, and maybe most people never get beyond reading the first 15 or so. of those Upanishads. So consequently, there is 958 Upanishads that need to be written. I hope somebody in this audience will get going and begin writing them.
I want to ask Dr. Frawley here. One of the things that always befuddles me is the lack of, and something we were discussing yesterday, why do you think that for most part of our independent history of India as a nation, why do you think, for instance, I'll give you one example and I want to ask you why this exists. For at least a decade now, we know that this idea of the Aryan invasion theory, कि बाहर से कोई घोड़े पे आए थे और हमें conquer किया था, this Aryan invasion theory is flawed. We have all written about it. Sanjeev has written about it, I have written about it, you have written about it, all of us written. In 2004, in an interview to the Hindu, Romila Thapar herself said that this doesn't have any validity anymore. Why is it that in 2016 you still feel in India a parliamentarian can go up to and stand in parliament and still quote a completely discredited theory, something that doesn't even exist anymore?
Well, first of all, people aren't educated properly. The textbooks haven't been changed properly. And a lot of the authority for textbooks has been given to people with certain political view that are overriding the evidence. For example, there is considerable evidence from the Archaeological Survey of India about the antiquity of civilization, connecting the Vedic civilization in India. There's considerable information by the Geological Survey of India about the ancient rivers. But some of the historians can say, we don't accept that information because it goes against what we believe in. So we have to understand that after independence, India allowed essentially a leftist view to take over the academia, and that has almost become an article of faith in the country. So there needs to be a new churning, a new examination of evidence, and a recognition that India has still not awoken from the colonial slumber and the alien ideologies through which it is being interpreted. Once that is done, all these things can be discovered. Since Vivekananda, Aurobindo, people have been telling it, but unless the people in the country make the effort to deal with the government and the educational system, and not just support Hinduism, that's not the point, but to bring in a view of truth that honors India's heritage. Greece, even though it's no longer Christian, honors its ancient Greek heritage. When new discoveries are found, they are highlighted and honored by the people. India should do the same.
So I want to just bring in Sanjeev here because he's wrote a wonderful book about the rivers of India, Land of Seven Rivers. Water and the idea of Saraswati, right? Could you delve a little bit into, because we are often told that supposedly this hunt for Saraswati is supposedly a joke.
Now, this is ridiculous because I think there's now more than adequate evidence. In fact, those of you who have Google Maps can go in there and actually see there is still enough water, moisture in the soil that even now, for a good part of the way, you can actually, even on Google Maps, tell where the path of the Saraswati is through Haryana on what is now the Ghaggar into the Thar. And then, of course, coming out near what is the Run of Kutch. The reason the Run of Kutch looks like the way it does is that it is the original estuary of the Saraswati. That's why it has this very strange landscape. In fact, if you had visited it 5,000 years ago, it would have looked much more like the Sundarbans. And not only that, something like 60% of the sites of the Harappan civilization are in and around this dry channel. So obviously this dry channel was of some importance to the Harappans. To say that, that cannot be denied because all the sites are there. It's ridiculous that we are even having this debate. The Rig Veda is very clear about where the Saraswati is. The Saraswati is between the Yamuna and the Sutlej. Now there's only one dry riverbed there. As I said, you can see it on Google Maps yourself. It can only be the Saraswati.
So there's a point that I want to make, and often when I was in school, हमें कहा जाता था कि 1947 के पहले India कह के कुछ था ही नहीं. There was no India. No, India begins only in 1947. Now this is true that the modern concept of a nation state called India begins in 1947. But Here's a vital question. एक बड़ा प्रश्न जो कभी हमें पूछा नहीं जाता, कोई जवाब नहीं देता था. Does that mean the idea of our civilization only begins in 1947? उसके पहले we were just warring tribes. ये गलत सोच है. This is fundamentally flawed. And I've explained this in detail in my book, Being Hindu. You have to also consider all the work that has been done on this. The idea of Bharat. You know, Diana Egg Howard की जो divinity के जो head है, उन्होंने एक किताब लिखा था India Sacred Geography करके. Basically, the idea of Bharat, of a civilization. Our civilization is a geographical civilization. There are very clear geographical markers to that civilization. और उसमें एक बहुत अच्छा, it's a very lovely point that comes out कि कैसे बना ये civilizational idea of भारत, आया कहाँ से, किसने बनाया ये civilizational idea of भारत, कि ऋषि मुनि और pilgrims, devotees के जो the footsteps of pilgrims mapped out the idea of भारत. That from Kashmir to Kanyakumari idea है India का, वो idea of भारत, that idea of our civilization comes from our ancient texts, it comes from our religious places, it comes from our holy sites. Because remember, even in our epics, and you know, D.R. Bhandarkar, the great archaeologist, numismatics, who gave the Bhandarkar series of lectures, Rupa की एक series है, आप पढ़िएगा, वहाँ पे वो एक, he says a very important thing, which was said by R.C. Mazumdar, the great historian also, that at the end of the day, India's epics, India's mythology, Ramayana कहिए, महाभारत कहिए, उनमें geography clear है. अयोध्या mention है तो अयोध्या है, there is an Ayodhya even today. Sri Lanka mention है तो there is a Sri Lanka even today. So this is all geographically mapped. Our mythology is not just imagination. Our mythology, obviously, and let me say this, I don't believe that we've invented nuclear weapons. That is rubbish. But we have enough. हमारे civilization में इतना कुछ है that we can be proud of what already exists. We don't have to invent new things. हमें कोई जरूरत नहीं है कि हम कुछ नया invent करें. But our civilization is a real civilization. It's a living civilization. We are one of the last civilizations, but the only civilization in the world which is still lived. We are living it every day. It is still alive. It's with us every day. It's not a dead language. It's not a dead language. It's not a dead civilization. It is not only meant for the museums. It is with us every single day. That's the point of our civilization. And I don't think that comes across. I just want to get in Dr. Frawley here once. So one of the things that I want to ask you is this idea of whether or not, there's been a lot of debate in this country about whether or not we should be taught the language Sanskrit, right? And whether it's a dead language, a live language, so on and so forth. What are your opinions about Sanskrit and whether it should be taught?
Well, it's well known that Sanskrit is probably the most scientific and certainly one of the most beautiful language and precise languages in the world. That is why it's being honored in the scientific world. It also has a tremendous literature in all areas: yoga, meditation, Vedanta, Ayurveda, Jyotish, one of the largest and oldest literatures in the world. And it has a very precise language, particularly for dealing with subtle aspects of mind, consciousness, intelligence, that there isn't yet an adequate terminology in the English language for. It also has the ability to stimulate the brain and higher awareness. It has the ability to promote concentration. It is the basis of the mantras that you find chanted all over the world, beginning with Om. It's the basis of the Gayatri mantra, comes from Rig Veda itself. So it is a tool of higher learning of the highest order. And one of India's great contributions to the world, it's a knowledge-based civilization. Veda, Vidya, Yoga. And as we move into knowledge-based eras, we need a knowledge-based language, and Sanskrit provides that. It is much the language of the future as it is the language of the past, and it has a universal orientation. In this tradition, it said it's not based upon belief, it's based upon the pursuit of knowledge. Knowledge requires not only the right approach, it requires the right language and the right orientation, and that is there in the Sanskritic culture.
I want to get in, Sanjeev, on something now which we were discussing. So now that we've discussed Sanskrit, one more point. We touched upon briefly on this whole Mahishasur Durga controversy, so to speak. Now you have a very unique, and not unique actually, you have the real sort of sense of where all of this comes from. Do you want to get into what we are hearing in a JNU campus about Ma Durga and Mahishasur, and what we know from our civilization about the worship of certain gods and deities?
Sure. I mean, I could tell you that, and I'll tell you that from the perspective of a Shakti, from the Shakti sect, which I myself belong to. The key thing to understand about Durga killing of Mahishasur is that he was not killed for being an Asura. He was killed for being arrogant and having become drunk with power, but those powers were given to him, after all, by Shiva and Brahma, of whom he was a great devotee. So he's not outside of the civilizational context, he's well within it. However, to understand this, I need to make a little bit of a detour, which you hopefully will allow me. It's very important to understand that the word Asura is translated in English language as demon, but in fact, this is not a demon and angels and demon interpretation of things. Many of our gods are actually Asuras. If you read the Rig Veda, Varuna, Agni, Rudra, and even in one instance, Indra himself are actually described as Asuras. So this is not the case that the Asuras are bad and the Devas are good. They are actually two different qualities of deities. They are conflicting qualities, but it is not obvious that one is good and one is bad. And there is a very strong tradition of the Rishi Bhrigu, many of you may know this, who actually who takes on this Asuric tradition, which remains alive to this day. So I'll just take a little bit of time to explain this. You see, Rishi Bhrigu is one of the most important rishis of the Vedic tradition. But what is interesting that he is completely against the entire Sattvic approach to things. So he gets angry very easily. He and his followers worship these fierce gods like Rudra. And they clearly like having their Soma. And his son, Shukracharya, becomes the guru of the Asuras. So this whole Asuric tradition is very, very strong. And of course, it remained strong into subsequent years. So for example, his great-grandson was Parashurama, who of course became an avatar of Vishnu, but himself, Parashurama, is a great devotee of Shiva. And this tradition, which is interestingly an Asuric tradition within Hinduism, and far from being in conflict with the Vedic tradition, this tradition considers itself a defender of Hinduism, in the sense that if you look at the great followers and of the lineage, intellectual and Gotra lineage of Bhrigu, you will find characters like Chanakya, Hemu, and so on. Many of the revolutionaries of the Indian independence movement were themselves followers of Bhrigu. So this is a very important tradition, and the modern manifestation of this, of course, is Shakti worship, the worship of Bhairava. So that entire sort of schools of thought come from, interestingly, the Asuric tradition. Now, it is interesting in this context that Durga Puja and Kali Puja and so on are done by those believing in the Asuric tradition.
Like in the Kal Bhairav in Kashi.
Yeah, so the Asuric tradition is the same tradition that is carrying out the Durga Puja. So why is the Asuric tradition worshipping Durga killing an Asura? Because from the perspective of those who carry out the worship, they see their own reflection in Mahishasur. It is their own ego that is being killed. It is the same thing. You see, you have to understand the allegory here. It's just like, why do we worship Kali? It's not like we are worshipping some rather angry lady who is running around the neighborhood with a sword. No, we are worshipping time. And we are worshipping the point that no matter how great you are, time will destroy everything. So the allegory and meaning that you have to understand behind it, otherwise the whole thing is meaningless.
Okay, I just have the last few minutes. I just want to make one point and open for just a couple of questions. We don't have too much time at all. Look, my entire point of writing a book called Being Hindu is this. I truly believe the future of India can only be one thing. We have a plural future where all of us need to live together. But our country is being divided by all these fault lines which we don't need to be divided like this. We are being divided on issues that we don't need to be divided. I'll give you one example, okay? There was a big controversy about whether the name of the road, Aurangzeb Road in Delhi, should be changed or not, right? Now, I agreed that the name Aurangzeb Road should be changed. But what did I say? I said the name should be changed to Dara Shikoh Road. Because we have to hold up examples in this country of a true confluence of faiths, of ideas, of intellectual basis. And Dara Shikoh is a perfect example. A man not far away from here brought together the true great traditions of his time and brought together the two intellectual bases on the basis of which Aurangzeb murdered him. So we should be celebrating men like Dara Shikoh. We shouldn't be celebrating men like Aurangzeb. And we are being told we know we must celebrate men like Aurangzeb. And I think it's deeply flawed. It's breaking our country. We should be celebrating, if we truly want to have a plural, secular, a truly united India, we should be celebrating people who brought the country together. Remember, there would not be, I'm in Uttar Pradesh, so I should say this, there would not be Kathak without the court of Wajid Ali Shah. We should be celebrating a man like him. We should be celebrating icons of bringing the country together, not be told that the men who caused maximum destruction to our country should be held up as an example. On that note, I just want to open up this floor and take a couple of questions. Bharti, yes, go on, ma'am. A microphone to her, please.
Both of you talked about pluralism being the only way the country can survive. I completely agree. But don't you think there's a new dictionary that's being used in India today where secularism, pluralism, etc. means Hindu bashing?
Yeah, I think there is an issue that needs to be properly debated on that. Every form of secularism, first of all, the real meaning of secularism is a separation of church and state, which does not happen in India. And I think that really needs to be done because, for example, almost all major temples in India are controlled by the state. So if this is a secular state, why is that happening? So I think it has to be about equal treatment of religions. I think it's a healthy, even for Hinduism itself, to be separated out. And I think that is the way forward. Incidentally, it happens to be that Hinduism is very tolerant. It doesn't have a sense of blasphemy. And very often Hindus have come to find that this tolerance is misused against them. And I think this leads to resentment. And unfortunately, one of the outcomes of this is going to be is that, and I find this when I'm talking to younger college-age students, is that they basically say that, look, if we begin to behave and begin to threaten violence towards people who are calling us names, then in fact we will get a reaction. Now this is an argument I'm afraid I'm slowly beginning to lose, and this is because of this really twisted way in which secularism is being defined.
I want to say, apart from blasphemy, does Hinduism even have a word for heretic or kafir?
No, there is no word in Hinduism.
That's the same.
Yeah.
That's exactly
there is
the
no
same.
such word. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Sorry, you want to say something?
I would say the fact India's respected tolerance and pluralism is only because of Hinduism. It's not because of these other outside
Very well
groups.
said, very well said.
And if you look outside of India today, there's much more intolerance where there are no Hindus. So Hindus are a factor of tolerance. In the Middle East, there are no Hindus. There's a lot less tolerance there. So let's honor the tradition for what it has to offer. It can be improved. It can be more tolerant. But tolerance doesn't mean you accept that you're denigrated. Tolerance means standing up for truth and equality.
In fact, Karl Popper had a term. See, tolerance can never be extended to tolerating intolerance.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Go on. Okay, do you want to come in front, ma'am? We'll take both the questions together and answer them.
Take a bunch of questions and answer.
Yes, we'll take a bunch of questions. Come this side. We'll take a bunch of questions and answer it all together. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, so I'm Sujata here. So I really was enjoying this discussion and I'm sure it could go on for days together. But coming to the point, I think Hinduism is is not a religion at all. It's a way of life. Because right from childhood, I was never taught that you have to go to a temple and you cannot go to a church because you are a Hindu. In fact, was sent to a Catholic school by my parents, where when the principal said, can she go to a chapel? My mother had said, how does it matter where she goes and prays? What matters is what she prays. So I think that's the outlook I have grown up with. My husband never goes to a temple with me, but he believes in serving mankind and he calls himself Hindu as well. So I think the words secularism, tolerance, liberalism are words of convenience interpreted the way people want to create controversies, and I would like you to define them and make it clear.
Yeah, we'll ask a few more and then...
We'll take all the questions together. Go ahead, ma'am.
So referring to the point where...
Your name, please.
I'm Kriti.
Okay, go ahead.
Referring to the point where both of you mentioned that Hinduism is about the pursuit of knowledge and seeking religion versus believing. So, and then you also mentioned about how the difference between Shruti and Smriti. So I would think that in my search for this pursuit of knowledge and pursuing and understanding the depth of Hinduism, that's what I would like to read, the three Vedas.
Yeah.
So although they're obviously not accessible. So
No, they are accessible, but okay.
Yes and no, I'll
We can, yeah. Okay, go on.
So my question is how do we make that aspect and that
Accessible.
knowledge accessible?
That's why people write books called Being Hindu. But anyway, go ahead, go on. So one more question.
One more question.
And then we'll answer it all together. Yes, both of you, go ahead, quickly, sir.
Very quickly.
My name is Ajay. I just want to know, we're talking about Hinduism in today's context.
Yeah.
So, whatever I gather is very philosophical. Is Hinduism, whatever we're talking right now, and why Indians don't follow it, is how can you make people understand Hinduism in an easy manner without going into such heavy philosophical, intellectual dialogue?
All right. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
There was a mention
Come
about...
this side. Come this
Yes.
side. No, not you, sir. Yeah, go ahead. Let him ask, and then you go ahead, sir.
There was talk about Hinduism being seeking and
Yeah.
not believing. So seeking implies some kind of an evolution, I suppose.
It could.
Yes, it could, some evolution. And where does this seeking end? Do we reach, on the way, do we reach any conclusions? And if we reach any conclusions, what is the basis on which we verify the correctness of what we have, the thing we have arrived? One.
Okay.
Second part is, this seeking, is this seeking of the truth similar to the enlightenment which the Buddhists talk about? And are Buddhists and Jainism part of this tradition of spirituality, this flow of spirituality which goes under the name of Hinduism?
Okay. The gentleman there, go ahead. Yeah, the last question. Go on.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity for the last question. What I have gathered from this debate is, and what I think is, years ago, the secularism or the secularists, I include everybody in that, Nehru, from the socialists in the Congress to the ultra-leftists, they defined it against the high Brahmanical and order and the Manuvad. Now, somewhere down the line, this thought got so patented by the left stream that they actually spread it all over the Hindus, irrespective of their caste or the creed or their opinion or their ideology. Now, Hindus are a self-indulgent lot. We don't say that we have some limitations and you have to accept that. We will just do our own thing and we'll not mess with your thing. This is the basic philosophy that a common Hindu abides by. Now what you guys have done is, now you have made everybody, if I say, गर्व से कहता हूँ मैं हिंदू हूँ, then the next thought would come into anybody's mind, he is a Sanghi. He doesn't want
Okay, so let's answer. We are coming
so
to the
why has the secularism in India has come
Let's answer this because we'll run out of time otherwise. Yeah, so we'll run out of time, so I'm going to be very, very quick. First of all, about the business about Shruti and Smriti that was asked and whether one should read it. One important thing to understand is that one does not have to read the Vedas to be a practicing Hindu, for the simplest reason. The 90% of people who are using an iPad only bother about the apps, they don't bother about the operating system. A few people need to think about it, but by and large, it is okay for 99.999% of Indians to think about the various apps. So the school of Hinduism that suits you for your seeking is what really matters. So yes, go ahead and read the Vedas, but the Vedas you don't really have to go to for most purposes. It's not for anybody, not for the thing. But yes, there are of course thousands of books you can read. There is no real truth. That is the point being made to you.
It is in you.
The real truth is in you. There are many paths. That is the whole point. Now, in this context,
you will discover whatever is the truth. You will
discover.
discover.
So there are many paths, and as you said, the gentleman they asked us, let's say I go down one path and I come to some truth. What do I do? Well, at that point, what you're supposed to do is to write a smriti. So that other people don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that is basically the whole point about it. That yes, if a few people who are really interested can go and read the Vedas, and in fact, it is entirely possible to write a smriti in any language. You can write it in French, or for all I care. So that is very important. Tulsidasa's Ramayana is also a smriti. It is just as valid as any other. So there is no problem with that. And yes, that was that. Now I'll come to the last point about Hinduism not being a religion. I have a real problem with that because moment you say that it is a way of life, it actually means nothing. So,
but this is the problem, because we think it's a way of life.
Yeah, so that is why I have a problem with this whole construct. I much prefer saying, you see, in the other context, you have religion is the same as belief, which is the same as a faith. So I like to put it this way: Hinduism is a religion, but it is not a belief or faith. It is a way of creating a belief or faith, but it itself, as Hinduism as a whole, is not. There may be beliefs, faiths inside Hinduism, but there are atheist Hindus, there are polytheist Hindus, there are monotheist Hindus. It doesn't matter. The framework is agnostic to all of that.
Okay, I'm going to be, right after this, I'm happy, I'll be at the bookstore, I'm happy to sign copies and so on and so forth. But the last word to Dr. Frawley. Last word to Dr. Frawley, and we have to end after that.
Hinduism has the largest number of temples in the world, the largest number of gurus in the world, the largest number of sadhus, the most people engaged in pilgrimage, the largest number of festivals. It includes everything that is in religion and something more. So it's not to be limited to a religion, but it's not to be excluded from a religion. It is an entire way of consciousness. And the ultimate truth of Hinduism is Atma, or oneself, one's inner being, even beyond God, even beyond a particular book. So that essence of Hinduism as the self, as the inner being, is what we are all seeking. It is a search within, from within, and an embracing of who we are.
Okay, perfect. Happy to continue this conversation outside this session. We'll be there at the bookstore, so happy to continue this conversation. Thank you very much.
1 second, may I request Raksha Jain, Apurva Jain and Priyanka Jain to please come onto the stage for felicitation of our speakers for this session.
Very good.
I'd like to also tell you that the next session that we are going to have is something called Laugh Out Loud with Surendra Sharma ji. I don't think he needs an introduction.